So we arrived at the last part of this first part of our conference, Fiction and the Sensible. We heard actually 3 very different papers on one topic. So now I open the discussion to everybody, so we have kind of 15 minutes. Yes, Leo is...
Thank you. Well, thank you for all 3 papers. I found a connection. They are not so unconnected from my point of view. But first the question. So my question is the politics of the aesthetic aesthesis a subversive way to reintroduce hope into contemporary narratives of emancipation, and to, let's say, put some understanding into this question, first with the politics of aesthetics, distribution of the sensible, 1968 comes to mind, it was mentioned, but also Herbert Marcuse, who dealt with similar topics quite in a different way. And second, it is quite hard, it's not easy to introduce some hope if you do it under hegemony of anti-humanist narratives of post-1968. So that's the background of my question about reintroducing hope. Of course, we know that hope is the topic of the third Kant's critique.
Is the topic of what?
The third critique of judgment.
Yeah.
That's about hope.
I just have a couple of sentences. So the question of hope, I think, when Rancière analyzes all these sorts of aesthetic scenes and where he discerns politics, I don't think it's, well, you could say it's hope, it's about hope, but in a way this is all, the politics is actualized already in all these scenes and in these art forms and forms of interpreting and so on. So maybe it's not something that would evoke some sort of a messianic future, but it's something that has already happened, that it sort of emancipatory moments that are actual already happening. So of course this is also something hopeful, but this dimension of the coming, the future, is not, I think, central. Yeah. So, and the anti-humanism thing, yeah, I think often, especially when discussing say literature, and yesterday he also talked about it. In some context, it's the idea of life, but this anonymous life, not individualized, but anonymous life, which is basically some sort of a vitalism that is not opposed to materialism, but is sort of a materialist vitalism. So it is inhuman in the sense that I quoted this scene from Proust, where this group of girls is not individualized, but it's just like pieces of the body, some shoulders and cheeks are floating in some sort of a cloud. And so it is in a way anti-humanist, because it's not about individuals and personal narratives and so on, but it is a sort of life. It's not anti-humanist in that negative way. It's some sort of a positive anti-humanism in a way. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, I think that hope certainly is something that the readers of Rancière see in him, because I see a lot of artists who can relate to him, who read him, who refer to him. So I think that it is something, related to his politics, because he preserves this possibility that art can still be political, and I think that this is certainly something, and it can also be related to this what I have called Schiller's anthropology, this idea that there is something substantial, that it is not only contingency, only regimes of art that come up and then disappear, and this could also lead to the end of art, because art is just a concept that is not, that doesn't have any substance. It's just historical. But yeah, I think we can also see in Rancière something more substantial, some idea of something maybe that preserves itself through history, or maybe that will eventually evolve through history. Maybe there is even some Hegelian moment in this evolution of the regimes. I think that, yeah, there is this duality between contingency and evolution toward emancipation, toward autonomy.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about hope. Hope for what exactly? And the thing is, I mean, Rancière describes certain dynamics of emancipation, but they always seem to be dynamics which go against the self in some sense. I mean, so if you're a self hoping for something, for a new world to come into being, I think emancipation is probably always going to run counter to that in some sense. It's going to be some kind of surprise that comes from the outside. But and also in terms of art, I mean, so there's a certain dynamics of art as dissensus, but what that does is precisely to give up on the idea that could be realized as some kind of politics, you know, could be realized as a program. So if you have art, or the aesthetics regime of the arts, which sets up a certain sensory field opposed to the functionality of everyday life and politics and whatever's outside of that space, there is always this temptation to try to realize a program based on this new sensory division. But I mean, I think Rancière describes in The Emancipated Spectator in particular that it's only when art gives up on this idea that it can have some kind of effect in the real, whatever that posited real might be, that it has the possibility of, i.e. it gives up on this representational idea, which it has an efficacy, which it would transmit to somebody else, which they will then realize in political action. I mean, this is exactly the sort of logic of abrutissement. I forget what the English term is, you know, but in The Ignorant Schoolmaster, when the schoolmaster is trying to, you know, coax the student on the way of learning and so on, always reinscribing the gap between his position of knowledge and their position of knowledge. And this is the sort of representationalist idea in a lot of political art. You know, it's a similar thing, and it has to give up on that precisely in order to create a dissensus, and I don't know, in The Emancipated Spectator, this logic between political dissensus and artistic dissensus, there's a kind of suggestion that artistic dissensus makes political dissensus possible, but only insofar as it gives up that will to want to impose something, insofar as political dissensus, you know, is able to articulate sort of like a common anonymous world, but it doesn't, of course, directly create political subjects, which is a political task. So yeah, hope. I'm not sure whether there's really a place for hope.
Any other questions? We have still 5 minutes for our last question. Then we'll do a little break before we start the part 2. So, yeah. Okay. So who was the first to lifting the hand? Okay, just ask, please.
Rancière develops his notion of mimesis parallelly with Auerbach's book, or perhaps in contrast to Auerbach's book of mimesis. And when we speak of mimesis, we always think of also this realistic or reality effect in literature. But he develops another kind of mimesis, this, as you explained, repeating the gestures of those who are those who have the right to think and work and enjoy idleness, and the workers or plebeians are not, they don't have this privilege, so they can sort of break this distinction between those who are able or allowed to do it from those who aren't. But I was remembered, as you were speaking of it, of another usage of mimesis. For example, in post-colonial theory, mimesis is a disputed question or a disputed gesture, because in work of Fanon or Baba or Chakrabarty, they often refer to mimesis as actually a conservative gesture of social climbers, of those who are oppressed and who imitate the oppressor, but actually they don't do revolution by doing it. They just repeat the oppressing gesture, and they choose new oppressed where they can exert this possessive politics. So, as you said, that Rancière possibly employs or implies a different dialectics of mimesis or also of metaphor. My question is, where do you see the distinction or difference between these two types of mimesis, if there are?
It's a complicated question. I'm not sure if I can give a proper answer. Well, as concerns realism, to answer that first, I think that in one book, Rancière claims that the emancipation or the ending of the representational regime is not the end of similarity, or I think similarity or another word, but an emancipation of similarity from all the representational rules that governed it before, like linking what is to be mimicked in what way through genre rules and hierarchies of subjects and all that. This post-colonial question is a hard one, yes. So maybe the difference is, if somebody that is oppressed mimics the oppressors, so that he or she could be a part of the system, but on a very low level. So. That's, I think, it's different to this scene on the Aventine Hill, where this sort of simulation is something that cannot be integrated into the system. So I guess it is very similar procedure, but cannot be used to the same effect in every situation.
Okay.
If that's an answer.
Okay. Thank you, Rock. Do you have a question still?
Just a quick one, because it will turn out as a follow-up anyway.
Okay.
It seems that, it occurred to me that maybe the metonymy is not simply the main device of the aesthetic regime, but also the very ontological status of it. When we talk about aesthetic regime, we tend to talk about a series of examples where there is no one single example that could serve as a paradigm. And so it's a metonymical series. But yes, then again, it's similar with someone like, Auerbach, who was mentioned yesterday. Auerbach's book on metonymy, basically, mimesis, it's a series of chapters, and it doesn't start with Flaubert, it starts with Homer, although it seems that the pinnacle of the book may be Flaubert. Maybe without Flaubert, Auerbach wouldn't be able to read Homer in the way he did. Or another example, a way more recent one, and Auerbachian one, Franco Moretti's book, his book on the metonymy, which is book on the bourgeois. Again, the main chapters are Flaubert and Defoe, Robinson, but there's a footnote that says maybe realism, metonymy, started with Vermeer, with Dutch painting. But nonetheless, without something like Flaubert, could he have that footnote? And maybe not Flaubert, but is there an example, is there a metaphor within the chain of metonymies?
Yeah, that was my idea of the metaphor, kind of, if there is no, how should I say, like if there's no strategic or an ontological ground, so what, could there be some sort of something similar to a ground that would kind of prevent the metonymical moments to just evaporate? And so I found this idea of the metaphor as a kind of this non-ground ground. And yeah, I think you could, perhaps there are, of course, like Flaubert is kind of a condensation of where, condensation of kind of an object where theories get broken and diversified. So perhaps there is some sort of a condensation there, yes.